Let me change this. There's a recent report out from Jim Hansen that says we've got to aim at 350 parts per million CO2 and then trend back down to 300. For those of you that follow the math on this thing, the pre-industrial level was 280 parts per million. So we're well above that at currently 387 parts per million. So the question is this. There's a real sense of urgency in moving this. There's that wartime sense of urgency. Amory, you mentioned with the conversion of Detroit to making equipment for war. What would you tell Mr. Obama or Mr. McCain about this? What has to happen in your judgment, if you had an hour with them, as you may, what has to happen at the federal level quickly to release market forces that Amory described? Anybody want to tackle that? Let's say you've got an hour or 30 minutes. You've got to be quick, concise. What can the federal government do? I'd make it a lot shorter than
that. I think if we let all ways to save or produce energy compete fairly at honest prices, no matter which kind they are, what technology they use, where they are, how big they are, or who owns them, we'd be a huge way along toward a sensible energy policy that's better for the economy, for security, and for climate all at the same time. Who's not in favor of that? Just the corporate socialists and free marketeers clothing. It's an impeccably conservative platform that leads to liberally desired ends, and I'm not sure who would be against it except the hogs with their noses in the trough. Federal energy policy is basically an elaborate system of troughs designed by the hogs. It's nothing at all to do with a free market or the general economic principles that our country espouses. And I think it'd be really refreshing for two rather maverick candidates like this to start debating over who is more interested in best buys first.
Technology. You know, we're a little bit struggling with that phrase that a guy used a couple decades ago about government being the problem, not the solution. And I think it's causing us to shy away from certain things that we all kind of agree are necessary. You know, for example, if we talk about renewable energy, if you talk about a single wind turbine, it has this problem that, you know, it's not windy all the time, and the output looks like this, and our load looks like this. But if you think about it, our atmospheric scientist friends will say, well, you know, wind energy is conserved in the atmosphere. It doesn't just stop. And so if you can connect wind turbines and wind farms from across the breadth of the continent, you know, from West Texas up to Saskatchewan, then it doesn't necessarily look like this. It starts to look like this. You can combine it with the storage installed in those plug-in hybrid vehicles. You can run your dispatchable plants, and you can match clean supply with demand, just the way we learned 100 years ago to match thermal coal and gas supplies with plants. The problem is we don't have a transmission system that's anywhere near being able to connect all of those nice clean sources that we'd like to develop and the loads where people use energy. We're just not even close. We don't have the technology, we don't have the infrastructure, we don't have the control, and you know, even the software. But we could develop that stuff. That's all technology that this country has the know-how to do. Probably other countries too, but why don't we do it first? Well, because there's some public collective investment that needs to happen to create that kind of an infrastructure. There's no single firm, even those with as much resources as a big electric utility, that can make even a dent in that investment without some public policy and funding commitments.
But I think on the one hand, we need a sense of urgency, but we can't, I mean, Jim Schlesinger once said, he's the first Secretary of Energy, Department of Energy, that in our country on energy policy we swing between panic and complacency. Panic and complacency. We need a sense of urgency, but I would say the analogy, but we shouldn't act in a panic way because we'll make bad decisions. And on the one hand, I'd like to have commented, Joel, we ought to put our wind turbines in D.C. because as much as they talk about these issues, we could power the whole East Coast.
Vertical axis, all the hot air.
But here's an important point. We want government to play a constructive role. And I think to solve this problem, it's going to take both government and business and NGOs working together to solve it. And we can't we need to kind of keep everybody's head in the game.
Yep.
Yep.
And so what I would say is that we need to have a sense of urgency on the one hand, but we need some cathedral thinking. And when you have cathedral thinking, think about it. All the great cathedrals in the world were built over 3 generations. The stonemasons, the people that built the foundation, never saw the stained glass windows. Those that built the stained glass windows never saw the spirals. At the end of the day, they had a vision, they had a faith, and they had a sense of urgency in their generation. To solve climate, this is not a 1-decade problem. This is a multi-generational. We need to think that way. This is not an Apollo project. It is not a Manhattan project. That's too small of a dimension in the project. It is more of a Marshall Plan, because we rebuilt Germany, we rebuilt Japan. We need to rebuild our own country now.